Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series. Can we save the Oakland A's? And we feel like we've got a bit of pressure on us to save the A's this season in 2035, which marks our 12th season as general manager of the Oakland A's. We're trying to guide the team to a fifth consecutive playoff appearance and a sixth playoff appearance in the last 7 seasons. But despite having the lowest budget in baseball once again, which is a mark that we have proudly held for the last dozen years, ownership is expecting us to just go out and win the championship this season. So there definitely will be some pressure on the Oakland A's. Also expecting us to upgrade at second base and increase fan interest. We've actually made a bit of progress this offseason with fan interest. Hopefully, if we play well on the field, that will continue. And although there is a lot of pressure on us, as we talked about in the last episode, the simulation that was ran expects our A's to be a very good team. 101 wins this year is the projection, which would be by far the most we've ever won in a season with this team. And apologies last time for missing this. I said that we didn't have any of the top players as far as hitters projected. And Jeansy noted that Jake Ortega, our defending American League most valuable player, is expected to have a really nice season with a 312 average, 19 homers, 90 ribbies, and 31 steals. That would be a very solid season. But quite honestly, if you look at what Ortega did last year when he won the American League MVP award, would actually be a bit of a down year, even if he puts up those nice numbers that he's expected to in the simulation that was run here. So although we do have high expectations for this season, if we stay healthy and we perform the way that we think this team could, there's a pretty good chance that we're going to meet those expectations and at least guide this team back into the playoffs. And then if we do get there, we'll see what happens. We've lost the AL West to the Rangers each of the last 2 years, had to play in wild card series, and this past season, 2034, marked a fourth consecutive season that we had to play in the wild card series, and it marked the first time that we got bounced. Although it's going to be a difficult hill for us to climb to get past the Rangers in the AL West. Certainly in a perfect world, would love to win the division with one of the top 2 records in the American League and ensure ourselves a first-round bye and the opportunity to avoid that wild card playoff series. And that is incredibly important because the only time in this playthrough that we finished in first place in the division and we avoided a wild card series was the time that we won a shocking World Series in our first playoff appearance with this team. So would love to top the record 96 wins that we put up a couple seasons ago in 2033. And we'd certainly love to match the World Series that we won in 2029 when this 2035 season is done and over. But clearly a lot of work for us to do between now and then. And the hope is we'll have the opportunity to sim through the first couple months of the season in this episode, see if we can get off to a good start this year. But before we get the season underway, one more thing we're going to do. We've taken a look at the waiver wire, and there is a guy who is interesting to us, and it is a pitcher. It's actually a guy that we have seen in some of our searches for trade targets over the last couple of years, and that's Camden Reisinger of the Dodgers organization. We've never actually made a trade for him because they've been asking for a fair amount, but what they've been asking for is not unreasonable given his pitching ratings. But we don't love that he's already fragile as a 26-year-old, and he's got some very negative personality traits, including low leadership, loyalty, work ethic, and high greed. So when there have been other opportunities available, it's someone that we just have never had at the top of our list of trade targets. But he's a guy who's still making the major league minimum. He's a guy who, in theory, can start or relieve, although that third pitch changeup of his is certainly not quite major league quality at this point. But over the course of parts of 3 seasons in the majors, he's put up a 185 ERA plus and an 83 FIP minus. We don't, unfortunately, have quite as strong a locker room as we have in past seasons. It's not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but just the one captain in Jason DeCaro and then 2 leaders in Caden Dana and Bobby Cabral. Don't have a spark plug anymore, and we do have outspoken Mike Lambert. But overall, team chemistry is happy, and I think that the roster for this team is strong enough to handle some negative influences in the clubhouse. You can see we've got the 3 leaders, only Stubblefield, low leadership. Got a ton of loyal guys, only a couple who aren't. A couple greedier guys, but a lot of guys that are not financially motivated. Tons of high work ethic guys, and nobody without. And 4 high intelligence players, only a couple that don't have the same baseball instinct. So there's definitely a few negative personality traits here and there in the clubhouse, but the preponderance of what we have in our clubhouse are positive personality traits, and that's really driven by the type of players that we tend to draft and acquire through international amateur free agency. So I don't think there's any guarantee that this pick on the waiver wire, this claim on the waiver wire, more accurately, will even go through. But despite some of the personality issues that Reisinger has in what is a win now year for our Oakland A's, I think that he's a guy who could certainly help us win now. So we're going to go ahead and put in a claim for Camden Reisinger, and we'll see if we're able to bring young Mr. Reisinger on board. And we gave it a shot with Reisinger. Unfortunately, there was a team that was worse than us in the standings last year. Looks like it was the Atlanta Braves that also put in a claim. So unfortunately, we'll miss out on Reisinger for the time being. We've split our first 2 games of the year against the Angels. Taking a look at our schedule here, we're obviously now finished up with the month of March, or we will be today after the 3rd game of that opening series against the Angels, and then getting into the month of May. A lot of action against our divisional rivals. We'll be home against Texas, back on the road against the Angels, at Seattle, and then we'll also be at Texas this month and at Houston. So a lot of games against our divisional rivals, and interestingly, after this first 8-game homestand against the Angels and the Rangers, we're going to be playing every team in the division on the road over the rest of the month, as well as those games against the Dodgers, the White Sox, and the Boston Red Sox. And 2 games into the season, we've got some potentially bad news. Could be really bad news for us with the fragile third baseman Colt Keith injured, diagnosis pending. Hopefully it won't be a major thing. He's been fragile the whole time he's been with us, but we've generally been able to have him in the lineup more often than not. He's held up pretty well. Played at least 130 games every season that he's been with us. So hopefully if he does have an injury, it won't be a major one, because He's already off to a nice start this season, 2 for 6 with a double, a homer, a run scored, and a ribby through the first couple games, although he has struck out in the 4 at-bats that he didn't get a hit in. As we think about this roster as the season starts, we talked at the end of our last episode about some of the final cuts that we made. Steve Allison, a guy who we think could be a pretty useful player for us at the major league level, was a relatively high draft pick in the past, and just want to ensure that he gets to play every day. Isreber Stewart, who was up with us as a utility infielder a year ago, is out of options, but we waived and DFA'd him. Nobody picked him up, so he's on our AAA team also. So we certainly have between those two and then the young catcher slash first base slash DH Byron Brain, a few guys down in AAA who could be helping us in the majors in the not so distant future. And my thought is that there's two guys who are really on watch with us as this season begins, and their 10 years in Oakland could both be in jeopardy if they get off to slow starts. They are both actually players that we've signed to extensions, so it won't necessarily be simple to move on from them, but I think they're both tradable. Kevin Stubblefield is a guy who we signed to an extension when he had very minimal major league service. In fact, I think at the time we signed him to an extension, he hadn't had an official major league at-bat in the regular season, although he had played for us in the playoffs. We were hoping he might become the new version of Tyler Soderstrom for us, who had a nice run for us at first base after we signed him to an extension early in this playthrough. Didn't think that Stubblefield would necessarily have the same type of home run power, but with the gap power and the speed he brought, kind of we thought might be a different dimension. But Stubblefield has been a completely league average offensive player over the course of his Oakland career. And other than his first season with us in 2032, he's been a below-average offensive player every year. He's not making a crazy amount of money, and he did benefit this past offseason from some improvement in his mediocre defensive skills. But given that he's basically just a first base DH type, if we can't get above average offense from him, he's not really adding a ton of value for us. You do see back there that 2031 AL Division Series MVP when we brought him up. He had some injuries at the end of the AAA season, but we still put him onto the playoff roster once he was healthy, and that Divisional Series MVP in 2031, the highlight of his career to date. But if he can't prove, closing in on 26 years of age, to be an above-average offensive player this season, I don't know why we'd keep running him out more than that. And the other guy who honestly is on watch is Bobby Cabral. He's got one of those Hidero Endo profiles, for those of you who have been following me through the course of this playthrough. Below average contact and horrible avoid strikeouts. Not the type of profile that I typically would have on my team before we started experimenting with Endo. And although I don't love Endo either, it has given me a new perspective on the game and a willingness to maybe try things that I've shunned in the past. That being said, Cabral's lack of contact and avoid strikeout ratings really had a significant impact on him last year. He's been in the majors with us now for, this is the start of his 4th season. The first 2 years with us, despite being basically a .220 hitter, he still averaged 40 homers and over 100 ribbies. But last year hit just a .177, 16 homers only, and 429 at-bats while striking out 189 times, putting up a 54 WRC+. You can see he struck out in 3 of his first 4 at-bats in the one game he played this year. He's a guy whose contract is also starting to get up to certainly not amounts that we can't afford, but amounts that if he's not a positive WAR and positive WRC plus player for us, it's going to be pretty hard for me to justify keeping him on the team. So he's a different type of player than Stubblefield in that he's a very solid defensive outfielder, especially at a corner outfield spot. But if Cabral and Stubblefield do not hit for us this year, they could be guys that we would look to move on from in the coming months as we get closer to the trade deadline and either look to find a trade target to replace them with, or perhaps to promote one of the other players on our AAA team that we talked about earlier. And the good news is that we've won 2 out of the 3 games we've played since the last time we checked in. So we're sitting here with a 3-2 record 5 games in. But it's taken that long for the Colt Keith injury diagnosis, and unfortunately he's got a strained ab, going to be out 4 to 5 weeks. So not the end of the world, but this is a guy who has very consistently over the time that he's been with us in Oakland been our best offensive player pretty much until the emergence of Jake Ortega over the last season and a half or so. In 869 career games in Oakland, Colt Keith has put up a 137 WRC plus for us, so his bat will certainly be missed while he's out. And with Keith out for the next month plus, we decided we would bring Steve Allison up to make his major league debut. He was a bit above average in AAA Las Vegas for us last year. Only 4 for 18 in the first 4 games of this season. But certainly will give us an upgrade defensively at third base. Don't know how much he's really going to hit at the major league level, but the main reason he was down in AAA is that we weren't sure we were going to be able to play him every day in the majors, and we'll try to make lemonade out of the lemon that is Colt Keith's injury and get a good look at Allison over the next 4 or 5 weeks while Keith is healing up. One other thing that we're hoping might happen, Dave Ackley, the catcher who we signed this past off season to a long extension, even though he only had 32 major league at-bats, and we're trying to turn into our starting catcher this year, as we really like his bat and his durability, and we think his glove is more than adequate behind the plate. But Jaden Boakai, who was our starter a year ago and really has been our starter for most of the last couple years, is a guy who's set to start making pretty significant money in arbitration next year, and then a lot more money after that. 3.67 and 9.5 are supposedly his arbitration numbers for the next 3 seasons. The hope might be that if we move Boakai into the backup role that we have this year, maybe some of those arbitration numbers will come down a bit if he's not playing every day. And maybe we'll be able to retain him for a little bit less than we think we'll have to right now. I think $3.6 million next year we certainly can afford, but if in a couple years he's making around $7 million and we still view him as a backup catcher, probably somebody that we're going to have to move on from at that point. But again, we're hoping maybe if this is a year where he only gets 150, 200 at-bats as a backup, perhaps some of those arbitration numbers will come down a bit and it'll be more palatable to keep him around for the next several years, because I do like the 2 catchers we have on the team right now with Ackley and Boakai. And Byron Brain is now getting the opportunity to start every day in Las Vegas at catcher. He played some first and DH there last year, was still an everyday player, but not nearly as good a defensive catcher as either of the other guys, and his batting profile is Hidero, Endo, and Bobby Cabral-esque, so I'm not in love with him, but the home run power and the eye are certainly intriguing. So we're going to likely see Byron Brain back in the majors at some point this season, but for the time being, we'll try to wring that last little bit of defensive potential out of him at catcher, and then think about how we might look to get him in the lineup going forward. Certainly, if we decide that we're going to move on from Cabral, Brain would be a guy to consider. He does have a better eye than Cabral, but his contact isn't even as high as Bobby's at this point. So I think at the major league level in particular, probably going to struggle to hit for a high average when he gets more extended playing time. And it's been a middling start to the season without Colt Keith. We actually had gotten off to an 8-5 start, but we just lost a 3-game series in Seattle, getting swept by the Mariners, which drops us to 8-8 midway through the month of April. 2.5 games behind who else? The Rangers in the division, and we're actually a game behind the Mariners now after they just took 3 in a row from us. Obviously, very early going of the season, not even 10% done at this point, but certainly would love to get out of the month of April with a winning record, particularly because we'll be doing it without Colt Keith. Unfortunately, we've just lost 2 more in a row to the White Sox to have dropped 5 in a row. The left-handed reliever, Chris Carl, going to be out for a couple of weeks with elbow tendonitis. He's been having another nice year for us, an admittedly small sample size of just 8 2/3 innings. But hopefully it won't become a major issue with Carl. We'll put him on the IL for the next couple of weeks, and we'll head back down to Las Vegas for some more help. And we are going to promote another one of our young pitchers in our organization, Bobby Garland. We picked him in the 4th round out of Greenwood Christian Academy back in 2029. He's come up through our organization. Like a few things about him, his stuff is pretty interesting. He's got a great changeup, durable as far as his injury proneness. Some positive personality traits, and he's off to a 4-0 start with a 2.63 ERA at AAA for us. Already put up a 0.8 WAR in just 4 games, which matches what he did in 9 games in his first foray into AAA at the end of last year. So we'll bring up the lefty to give us some help out of the bullpen for the next few weeks while we're going to be without Chris Carl. And despite the injuries to Keith and Carl, we did play a bit better over the second half of the month of April. Got the team back over 500 and in second place at 15-13. We are 5 games behind the Rangers. They look like they are well on their way to the 100-win season that was projected for them. Similar for the Royals, but unfortunately for us, it looks like the Yankees right now would be the 3rd team in the American League to easily get to 100 wins rather than our Oakland A's. Right now, if the season were to be over, we'd be out of the playoffs. We're a game and a half behind the White Sox for the final playoff spot, but it is still very early going. Taking a quick look at the leaders, nobody on the top or near the top of the main leaderboards for our Oakland A's thus far. Taking a look at our team statistics a month into the season, the 15-13 record, we've actually gotten a bit lucky, expected to be 13-15. Very bad offensive start for us, ranking 12th in the American League in runs scored, and we're middle of the pack, 8th in runs allowed, which is a very odd position for us to be in. Taking a quick look at the pitching, Jason DeCaro having a rough year, but otherwise the starters doing pretty decently. But some surprisingly poor performances out of the bullpen with the new addition Mike Curtis, Rodolfo Quintanilla, who we brought up from the minors this year, and R.J. Cope, all with ERAs of over 5. You can say the same thing about the new addition, Bobby Garland, but he's only pitched 1 inning, so hard to get on him too much compared to the guys that are performing pretty poorly with a much larger sample size than the youngster Garland. And speaking of youngsters, Steve Allison is kind of holding his own at the majors. 17 for 70, so he's hitting 243, 4 doubles, a couple of home runs, 86 WRC plus, so he certainly hasn't been great, but with his good defense, he's still been above a replacement level player. If he keeps kind of playing this way, would tend to think that we'll probably send him back down to AAA to play every day once Colt Keith is ready, but we'll also check in on the guys that we put on watch, namely Stubblefield and Cabral, and if either of them is off to a really rough start, maybe we'll have some interesting decisions to make over the next few weeks when hopefully Colt Keith will be ready to come back. And we continue to struggle against the Mariners, only one of 3 games in Seattle, so we're just 1 game over 500. Fortunately, we were even closer to having Colt Keith back than we had anticipated, and he is now ready to come off the IL. We'll probably give him this weekend just to shake off a little of the rust in AAA since he has been out for over a month at this point. But as of Monday, 3 days from now, I'm guessing we will have him back on the Major League roster and need to make a decision about who to send down. And we did take 2 out of 3 against Baltimore without Colt Keith, so not that it's been that long since we checked in on the standings, but we're still in second place at 18 and 16. Unfortunately, we've dropped to 6 games back since the Rangers continue to play very well. Only 1 out of the wild card spot at this point, so we are still right in the mix for the playoffs, and certainly having Colt Keith back should help with our playoff aspirations. And Keith, for what it's worth, only started 1 out of the 2 games he played over the weekend, 0 for 4. Certainly would have loved to have him have a hit, but with the way our offense is starting out these first 5+ weeks of the season, I think getting our cleanup hitter back as soon as possible makes sense. In checking in on the guys who we could look to move on from, Allison, the batting average is dipped down to 230. Hasn't done much in the week or so since we checked on him, down to an 80 WRC plus. Again, hasn't been horrible, but I tend to think unless Stubblefield or Cabral has been an epic disaster, we probably still send Allison down just because once Keith is back, it's going to be tough to find him playing time. Stubblefield hasn't been great. 11 for 44 on the season, only 1 homer. His 70 WRC plus is less than Allison's, but at least we're not going to have to play Stubblefield every day if we keep him up. Bobby Cabral looking to bounce back from that brutal season a year ago, and I guess he's a little better. The batting average has actually dipped to 170, but he does have 5 home runs in 88 at-bats, so the WRC plus is a 60, which is 6 points better than it ended up a year ago. He's off to a rough start as well. I'm going to try to give them both a little longer of a leash, although it's not been a great season so far, especially given the fact that we thought we could be on target to win over 100 games and guide this team to the playoffs. And if we keep playing the way that we have, neither of those things will happen. But getting Colt Keith back into the lineup certainly should help. And with Keith, I just don't have an everyday spot for Allison. I don't think in the majors. Andy Toribio, last year's Rookie of the Year, is hitting 286 at shortstop. Alejandro Landin hitting 252 with 6 homers as our everyday second baseman. And Abraham Camacho at first base is hitting only 203. But given the pretty big investment that we made in him and the way that his ratings look, we're going to certainly continue to give him regular playing time and hopefully get that bat going as he gets a little more comfortable to major league pitching after coming over from Cuba this past off season. And we've got Colt Keith back in the lineup. We won 1 game out of 3 at home against Houston this week, but then did take 2 out of 3 on the road at the Yankees, finishing up a swing to the Eastern United States with 3 at Boston, followed by 4 at Toronto, and then we'll be back at home for a nice long homestand to finish the month of May, facing our division rival Mariners, a team that's had our number thus far this year, the Diamondbacks, and the Rays. 21-19, so again, it's kind of a win one, lose one kind of situation this year. Still in second place, but 7 games behind the Rangers now. Jake Ortega is third in the AL in steals. New addition Brady Harris, off to a nice start with us, is third in the AL in batter WAR. So it looks like the offense is being a little more productive of late, but certainly would like to come out of the month of May being much more than 2 games above 500. So we'll see if that long homestand at the end of the month gives us an opportunity to maybe rip off a 7-3 record or something in those 10 games and get this team positioned a lot better 2 months into the season than it is right now. And Chris Carl, the left-handed reliever, ready to come off of the IL now. He's finally healthy. Mike Curtis continues to struggle, and he is actually in a slump right now. R.J. Cope and Ted Johnston also struggling this year. Cope doesn't have options. Johnston and Curtis do. Curtis, you'll remember, was one of our, we thought, important acquisitions this past offseason. Made a trade for him. Extremely popular guy, a fan favorite with a good personality, but he's off to a pretty rough start here in his Oakland career. He's been below replacement level with that 6.43 ERA. Since he's cold right now, we're actually going to send him down to make space on the team for Mr. Carl. I don't think it's going to be a long trip. I do want to give Curtis a pretty good opportunity in the majors this year, but given that he's slumping right now, I'd rather have him work out of that slump in AAA. I do think if in a week or two he's kind of past that slump, we'll probably bring him back up, and if Ted Johnston hasn't turned things around, maybe send him down. Johnston, you may remember, was an all-star for us last year, his first full season in the majors with us, but his ERA has more than doubled from 2.85 a year ago to 5.96 this year. His BABIP almost 100 points higher than it was a year ago. His Sierra indicates that he's probably gotten a little bit unlucky compared to where his ERA is, but if he doesn't do more, we may send him down once Curtis is ready to come back. Bobby Garland is the guy that we brought up for Carl, but Garland's been pretty good with a 2.61 ERA over 10 1/3 innings, struck out 13 batters. I do worry about his control over the long term, and he has actually walked 5 batters in 10 1/3 innings, but if he's keeping his whip in that 1.16 area, I really don't care if he's walking that many batters because he's not giving up a ton of hits. And with Carl and Keith back, we do seem to be playing a little better. Although we lost 2 out of 3 in Boston, we swept a 4-game series in Toronto. So we pushed the record to 26-21, still second place in the Western Division. And as we noted, we've got 10 games in a row at home now. And if we're able to have a winning record over those 10 games, we're probably not going to feel too bad about where we finish up the month of May, despite a start that was less than awe-inspiring for this Oakland squad. And we did end up with a 6-4 homestand. We took 2 out of 3 against Seattle and 2 out of 3 against Arizona before splitting the 4-game series against Tampa Bay. So definitely playing a bit better of late. We've made it to June 1st, still in second place, 32-25 record, 6 games back in the division. But we're now 1 game up on the Rays and the Yankees for the final wild card spot in the American League. So we've made a bit of progress over this past month, particularly these past 2.5 weeks. Jake Ortega still ranks 3rd in the league with 15 steals. You can see he's also hitting .327, 9 homers, 38 ribbies. So he is following up his MVP season a year ago with another excellent season for us here. Take a quick look at the team statistics, and we're only 1 game above Pythagorean expectations right now at 32-25, so things kind of normalizing a bit. We have had a winning record every month of the year, 2-1 in March, 13-12 in April, and then 17-12 in May most recently. The offense, as we've talked about, has really turned it around over the course of the last month. Ranked 3rd in the American League in runs scored, and we are in the top half of the league in every offensive category except for walks, where we're tied for 9th. So that's good to see. Pitching, not as good as it has been in recent years. Pretty much a middling pitching staff. You can see we're 7th or 8th in a lot of the key categories. Hits allowed, we're 1st. Strikeouts, we're 3rd. BABIP, we're 2nd. Opponent's average, we're 2nd. I guess that it makes sense that the opponent's average is probably going to be pretty low if we're one of the top teams in terms of not allowing hits. The defense, 2nd in defensive efficiency and 2nd in zone rating. So a little bit surprising that the pitching hasn't been better. On paper, I think it probably should be better than a mid-range pitching staff. But we've always been able in this playthrough to find some pitching when we needed. So if we're still struggling a month and a half from now, as we get closer to the trade deadline, hopefully there will be some opportunities in the trade market to improve the pitching. But glad to see the offense much better in the month of May than it was in the month of April. And as we get ready to finish up the episode, we rank 5th out of 30 teams in the latest power rankings. So our strong performance of late looks good for us. Look at this game here. I missed this. We just beat Tampa Bay 1-0 in the 10th. Luke Little got the win in relief. Jason DeCaro was the pitcher of the game. And he must have had quite a game. Yeah, 1 hit over 9 innings, 2 walks, 3 strikeouts. So pretty close to a no-hitter for Jason DeCaro, although we don't know exactly when they got that hit, but a nice outing from him, although Little gets the W in relief. As we talked about, 2nd in the AL West, but in a playoff position if the season were to end today. Not really doing well in terms of convincing people we're ready to win a championship, but as we've talked about, done a decent job thus far increasing fan interest. And Alejandro Landin has been a solid upgrade at second base thus far, hitting .272 with a .461 slugging percentage. So nice to see the youngster taking over that position. He's a guy that we've invested a lot in terms of IAFA dollars and several trips to the development lab over the years. And good to have the young Mr. Landine off to a solid start for this year. We'll check in on his statistics in a little more depth. 272 average, as we noted, 14 homers, 14 doubles, 9 homers in those 217 at bats, putting up a 117 WRC plus for us with a 1.5 WAR. So a really nice start to the first full season in the majors of Alejandro Landine. Fielding wise, certainly an above average defensive second baseman with 990 fielding percentage, a 5-zone rating, and a 1.063 defensive efficiency here in the somewhat early going of this 2035 season. So as we get ready to call it an episode, things are going reasonably well for the Athletics. The 101 wins we had in the simulation might be a little ambitious for us to reach, but the hope of getting a 5th consecutive playoff appearance and a 6th postseason berth in the last 7 years seems very realistic for this team as the calendar turns to June. And we'll find out how June and likely the early stages of July go in our next episode. As we get closer to the middle of the season, we'll likely do our mid-season review and start outlining a potential strategy if there's something we think we need to do in the trade market. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.